link will be very beneficial. And of course, SDG shapes your CSR strategy. Because if you take a close look of any SDGs, the one particularly of interest for the industry is SDG 9, which is about innovation, infrastructure, and I forgot the last one, but something about technology. The growth from the study of ADB, for example, it shows unless a country can continue to grow more than 2% over 10 years, then you can see, coupled with equal access to economic opportunities, then there is a chance to actually tackle the fundamental issue of poverty. So we have to be on the same team. But it's no longer about just being a Bangalore team or India team, but we have to be a global team. And the global team requires, at least we understand what you're saying, and you understand what I want, right? So we have to have a common language. So hopefully with this, we could somehow find a way to a win-win relationship and create a virtuous cycle in this whole process. Next, please. So a bit additional sort of motivating talk is to say, hey, the investors and financial incentives are there. So there are some studies showing that the total assets under management has already become sort of greater for 36%, which is under the title of sustainability. And that regulatory requirements are increasing. And firms, the EY and the others are talking about, the UN Compact also has a very powerful tool, which is called the Principles of Responsible Investment. That will drive very much behind the ESG related investment today and in the time to come. So what are the proven benefits? I have cited a few, since you will have a chance to get my PowerPoint, and so you could see that it has a branding power, it has actually, in terms of performance, actually drive, for example, Unilever's sustainable living brands are actually making greater profit amongst the whole set of portfolio. Nice story, but could be challenging. You said, hey, we are working on the most important part of the corporate sustainability. Who wants to buy in? Why should they buy in? So I think we tend to run into a few barriers that makes it difficult to continue a conversation with very busy managers who is trying to meet their production targets and quarterly profit targets. So we continue to face known enemies, short-termism versus long-term perspective. I'm not surviving this quarter, so don't tell me about 5 years, 10 years, or even longer. Second, of course, traditionally, business is to say, my job is to generate profit for my shareholder. What are you talking about, stakeholder? Who? So we're changing the whole perspective, and we have to also develop a new set of language in order to tackle that. And data we know is today's currency. But data is very expensive. It's expensive to collect, especially if you want to prove that your social interventions are actually impactful. You want to prove that your intervention in terms of environmental biodiversity, water pollution, air pollution, reducing impact in terms of on the ocean because of the plastics that you are choosing differently. How are you going to prove this? Sometimes we don't have methodology, others it's just too costly to collect. So data continues to be a major barrier besides what I'm talking about attitude aspect of it. So to go for a convergent approach, as I said before, helps us to save some money. And also to exchange with others, because you can start to see amongst the scholarly research, more and more proposals for research for measurement are coming up. However, that is a break between the scientific community with political policy community as well as business community. We have to get this communication opened up so that we don't have to repeat someone else's work. So, ways to overcome challenge. We all know that without political will, without leadership commitment, it's very difficult to add items into the budget. And this means that we might have to consider setting up some new intermediary or change or transform the existing intermediary organs within the organization in terms of governance. But technology could also come to help. So the investment is not just for reporting. It is also to improve the performance, the operation of the corporation. So we have sort of a partner from the IT department. The more difficult and more essential today is the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? It's actually the community, the location where the corporate is operating, the community that you're trying to sell your products to. These are the stakeholders need to be taken consideration, because they are the ones setting the tone of the reputation of a firm. They are the ones setting, in a way, indirectly, the agenda for the future. And so we need to start thinking about a term and a function which is done just like CSR, as Mr. Khan right at the beginning mentioned. Who is responsible? And one of these things about establishing stakeholder partnership is called, we label it business diplomacy. And first paper was published by the Academy of Management in the early 2000s. And since then, PhD department and all that. But who knows? Any one of you ever heard of the term business diplomacy? Right. So more work needs to be done. You could see the transmission of knowledge is very slow in a large system. The boundaries are not permeable to allow information from one sector to another. But I think this is what needs to be done. To make it simple, meaning that the corporations or business should not be shy away from talking directly with not only client, but also communities that be impacted by you or potentially could impact you. And this conversation would allow us to start a process of co-design, co-define the problem, and possibly open up new avenues for solution. If we recall the discussion that many years ago we tend to have is about why should we go for quality circle? Why would the less educated, not so skilled employee understand the business requirements? And lo and behold, there were a lot of surprises. Didn't come up because they didn't bother to tell you, because you didn't bother to be considerate of their views and opinions and experience. So I think, let's be open and have a conversation. I won't go into key change activities. You are all very good in terms of your profession. But I would like to highlight 2 points, the last two. Is start to engage with stakeholders through business diplomacy, because business diplomacy is not about marketing to say I'm right, but rather is having a more appreciative inquiry kind of conversation and engagement and stay over time. And one of the things is that many of the customers or communities, they feel uncomfortable in this kind of interaction because they feel they give out data, they give out information, and they don't get back. So we have to make it a circular, creating feedback loops to allow for true partnership. And the second thing, which is called more and more about public-private partnerships. Government cannot do something totally alone, nor the business. We are talking about a collective change effort. So this PPP, if used properly, could also open up new possibilities for scale. 10 little projects, adding it up, would not achieve the same level of impact if this project was co-designed, coordinated, strategized together. Right? So this is what we have to move to, and we are most of the time uncomfortable because it takes time, it's not convenient, we have to convince others, and making all this sort of time, energy waste kind of effort. If I go by myself, it's much faster and effective. So we also have to change individual behavior. Companies are doing well. This is sort of known companies. And I just like to end my input with highlight, to say some of the SDGs could be very helpful. If you're interested, 3 means health and well-being. Right. So the topic we're working on, one of the topics that we're working on, aging, comes under this. Number 4, education. The challenge, I think, for India is that continued business economic expansion will run into a human capital deficit. And it's because you have previously the general education was not sufficient. And SDG 8 is about it's about economic growth and decent work. Number 9, as I mentioned before, is about now I remember. Innovation, industrialization, and infrastructure. So and number 12, which is, I think I saw some paper in the newspaper about circular economy. And number 13 is climate. But let's not forget, environmental issue is not only about climate warming, but it's actually about the land degradation, the losing of biodiversity. When eating is one of the most important needs of all human beings, and the issue about 14, life under the water, and 15, life on land, becomes very critical. SDG 16. If you want to contribute to better governance, not just about cooperation, number 16 allows you to look at what you can do and what kind of choices you can make in terms of general governance. Because one of the elements of SDG 16 is about strong institutions. And we know that countries who moved out of poverty, move into the advanced economic category, most of the time because they've been able to have strong, functioning, and fair public institutions. So SDG, from that point of view, if you apply ESG, the G is very interesting to look at the larger system. And SDG 17 primarily is dealing with partnership. So if you want to sort of leverage your 2%, SDG 17 might be also another way, which is about process, going beyond the final product, and it's easier to measure. So with that note, I make my conclusion. It is about common language, it's about interoperability, it's about transparency. So the convergence makes sense. Business is not only actor today, is embracing a data-driven approach, but apply the same kind of capacity that you already have to the activities in ESG as well as CSR. And the shift from compliance to impact, that's the future, right? Because a wolf won't survive if there's no sheep. And we have projects from Canada. Antelope was eaten up by wolves too much. So to protect antelope, they eliminated wolf from the natural parks. And they, a couple years down the road, they found antelope suffer from high blood pressure, cholesterol, and heart disease and other issues. So they reintroduced appropriate number ratio of wolf. So we need to see how nature keeps things in balance. And so let's try to go for a unified approach on the SDGs when we carry out CSR and ESG reporting. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking too much time.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Up next, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Raymond Sainer, a distinguished expert in international management, diplomacy, and sustainable development. He is a professor titular in organizations and international management at Basel University and a co-founder of Center for Economic Development, where he also leads the Diplomacy Dialogue Initiative. He has previously served as a bureau member of UNEC's Committee on Innovation, Competitiveness and Public-Private Partnerships and is a member of International Advisory Board of the International Chamber of Sustainable Development. Additionally, he is a lead auditor and the Academy for Quality in Training and Education and serves as CSEN's chief representative to UN bodies such as ECOSOC, UNP, WIPO, and WTO. He holds a PhD in social psychology from Union Institute and University Ohio, USA. We welcome you, sir. Thank you so much.
It's no longer good morning, but I say anyway, bonjour to all of you. It's an honor to be here present with you. I'm thankful for the invitation. As you have heard, we know one of our introductory speakers, Mr. Mohit Gandhi, for only 20 years. I've been the first time to India 52 years ago. So I see things, I have pictures in my head about what India used to be, what it is today, and it's impressive when I look at the infrastructure development. And that includes also taking on board, in terms of understanding what businesses could do, CSR. So my presentation, now I will cut it short because we want to also be sure that we have enough time for discussions. So I would like to just, in that sense, also when I listened to Parveen Khan, I realized that a lot of things that I had in the initial part of my presentation you already know and you probably discuss it. And the 2 points that I'd like to now share with you is the consideration about trade-offs and synergies when we look at CSR and ESG. And SDGs at the end. We cannot do everything at the same time, right? So what's more beneficial? What are the trade-offs if you do one or the other, but not this or that? And that's my first point. The second point is I'd like to also talk about the larger picture. India will present its third voluntary national review in New York. Lija and I are going regularly to the meetings in July when about 40 countries present what they have done, what they have been able to achieve in regards to SDG implementation. So I will at the end also talk about that, and maybe that could be also a discussion point when we move to discussions. So please just move all the way forward to the section trade-offs and synergies. Okay, all right. Now, how do I get forward? All right. Okay, as I just said before, it's obvious one cannot do everything at at the same time for budgetary reasons, but also just in terms of implementing all these instruments. It takes human resources, it takes attention, it takes focus, and companies sometimes have emergent matters to attend to. So the question is how to navigate this difficulty of having to choose what can we do, what should we do, and maybe what do we put back for a later implementation. Next. So now let's have a look in more detail, next one, when it comes to the micro level, which for me is what we do as a company in regards to CSR. Companies could or maybe sometimes focus on philanthropic activities rather than to have a systemic business change perspective. Mr. Khan, in a way, alluded to it in his introductory speech. It should be strategic and shouldn't be something nice to do, some kind of accumulation of charity activities which are not making sense from a company's strategy point of view. Next. Do I move forward, or can you do it? Can I also do it here? So, the synergies, and how the synergies. Trade-offs. I already talked about trade-offs. Let's move to synergies. Next. Synergies. Yeah, okay. To do CSR in a smart, meaningful, concentrated, logical manner will benefit the brand. Because if it's just a punctual, one-time, one-off activity with a charity component to it, it's easily forgotten quickly. But if it is something that is focused, deliberate, and repeated, if it is successful, it will definitely add to the brand reputation of the company. So it should include, ideally, CSR in its thinking. By this I mean strategic thinking. So it's not, again, as I said before, not just a one-off thing. It is consistent, and it starts to bear fruits by having a good and logical repetition. Trade-off at the meso level. For me, ESG is a sectoral, professional, business responsibility. It's no longer just one company alone. To me, ESG also differs if you're a bank or in the banking sector. ESG takes particularly, focus on what do banks do, and how could then ESG be applied to the banking sector. Food production, transportation systems, they are, let's say, clear sectorial brands, or not brands, sectorial companies who together ideally meet and clarify what is for them, for their sector, a meaningful ESG. How the ESG is then implemented by the company, that varies. But there should be commonality if you are all in the same business to agree on what should be the minimum or the basics of ESG. But and we also know there is resistance to ESG. Licha mentioned that before. Maybe some of you, let me ask you, have you followed the difficulties that Mr. Fink of Blackwater faced in the US when he was proposing for investors to be mindful of companies' implementation of ESG? Let me see by a show of hands how many of you have followed the heated debates in the US where he was